Find out more about this latest method of CPR at handsonlycpr.org. A message from the American Heart Association and the Ad Council.
Thank you for tuning in to LA Talk Live, reality radio handcrafted for your listening pleasure. This is LA Talk Live, and we're more than just talk. Stay tuned.
Joshua Lane, member of the board of directors of Dr. Ann Wigmore's Hippocrates Health Institute, Josh Lane was part of the Dr. Ann Wigmore team that brought wheatgrass, sprouts, and raw foods to a worldwide audience. And now the host of Here's to Your Health on LA Talk Live, Joshua Lane.
Thank you for tuning in to this edition of Here's to Your Health on the LA Talk Live radio network. My name is Joshua Lane. Thank you for listening to us today. Our guest is Isaac Campos. Isaac Campos is teaching history at the University of Cincinnati and has written a very interesting book on the use of cannabis sativa, also commonly called marijuana. The book is called Homegrown, and it's very interesting and it's nicely researched. Isaac Campos, welcome to Here's to Your Health.
Thanks for having me.
No, it's my pleasure to have you on. And my question for you is, you are teaching history at the University of Cincinnati.
Yeah, that's right.
Where did you pick up your undergraduate and graduate degrees?
I went to, for my undergraduate, I went to the University of Michigan, and for my PhD, I went to Harvard.
Okay, you have a degree in history from Harvard. Now that obviously is a great school. May I ask you, as a professional historian, why did you have interest in cannabis sativa, commonly called marijuana?
Sure, and let me just mention, I don't know, our connection isn't very good, so you keep breaking up a little bit, so hopefully it sounds okay on your end. I'll keep talking, but if I may have to stop at some point.
Isaac, no, you sound very good. The connection is good. It's very good, yeah.
Okay. So where did my interest come? Well, I was very interested in the war on drugs, first of all. So I originally had planned to write a kind of international history of the war on drugs, and I was particularly interested in the history of the war on drugs in Mexico. And so that is an international history that would involve both Mexico and the United States. But I wanted that history to be as much about Mexico as it was going to be about the United States. And so I began doing a lot of research on Mexico and the history of drugs there, and I began to recognize that very little research had in fact been done on the history of drugs in Mexico. We knew very little about why drugs had been prohibited in Mexico. We knew very little of the most basic facts. For example, it was widely believed that it had been Mexican laborers who had introduced the practice of marijuana smoking into the United States, but no one had ever really done any research on the history of marijuana in Mexico. So we didn't even know how marijuana began to be smoked in Mexico, or where, or how many people did it, or et cetera. So that ultimately led me to place my focus just on marijuana, which served as a kind of vehicle for understanding these larger issues of the origins of drug policy in Mexico and the origins of the war on drugs there.
And the research you're doing on cannabis sativa, commonly called marijuana, I noticed that you feel that the substance has been very much demonized. Today it has been, but that your research shows that it has been consistently demonized.
Yes, that's right. It's often one of the things in the historical literature and also the popular literature on cannabis was this idea that it had quite recently been demonized. But in fact, as I started to look into it, I found cannabis had a kind of nasty reputation in lots of different cultures around the world, going back 2,000 years even, from China to the medieval Muslim world to Europe in the early modern era, India, etc. So I found that actually, in fact, this wasn't anything new, and that the most common kind of pernicious trait that was connected to cannabis throughout history was its supposed connection to madness. So this idea of reefer madness, as we call it in the United States, was in fact nothing new at all. It was something that had been linked to cannabis for a very long time.
And based on your research, and let me just, so for the viewers who are just tuning in, we're speaking with Isaac Campos, teaching history at the University of Cincinnati. His new book, Homegrown, about the history of marijuana. I think a lot of people that I've been chatting to about your book are surprised that cannabis sativa was introduced to Mexico from Spain. And many people thought, oh, no, it's always been from Mexico, but indeed it was introduced from Spain as an agricultural crop. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. So cannabis is actually native to Central Asia, which is a kind of vague description that's used because we don't know exactly where it's native to, but it's somewhere in Central Asia. Eurasia is where it's from. And it was not present in the Americas prior to conquest. The Spanish were the first to import it as an industrial fiber. So it was imported as what we call hemp. So as an industrial fiber, which was used especially in the shipbuilding industry. So as I mentioned in the book, cannabis was literally the stitching of early modern maritime empire. So it was used to make sails and ropes and all sorts of other things that went into these ships that were so critical to the early modern era of discovery and of conquest. So that's how it first came to the Americas. But gradually over time in Mexico, it kind of slipped into native pharmacopoeias and became what after not too long of a time came to be thought of as a quite Mexican or indigenous drug plant. So not just a fiber plant anymore.
Mm-hmm. And when people began to discover its I'll say medicinal properties or recreational properties, is this when problems began to be written about? That is, that the authorities for some reason were very unhappy with cannabis as a substance?
Yeah, so what happens in Mexico, so in order to understand the historical path of cannabis in Mexico, you have to understand a little bit of the background of drugs in general in Mexico. So Mexico is the world's richest country in hallucinogenic drugs.
Huh?
It has many substances with which many of your listeners are probably familiar, peyote, various kinds of so-called magic mushrooms, and the like. And these substances were widely used in Mexico for kind of medical religious purposes. So there wasn't a major divide between medical and religious practice in Mexico prior to the arrival of the Spanish, and there wasn't for some time after that. And these hallucinogens in Mexico were very powerful, and they were associated with, quite extraordinary effects. So they caused extraordinary visions, and they were used by Indians in Mexico to commune with the supernatural and to be able to see the future or divine the origins of someone's illness or something like that, right?
Yes.
And so when cannabis comes to Mexico and starts to slip into native pharmacopoeias, cannabis is also what we call a psychotomimetic drug. So that is, it's like hallucinogens, and it's sometimes classified as a hallucinogen, though it's a very mild one. It can cause symptoms that are similar to symptoms that are associated with psychosis, things like paranoia or panic attacks, or in very high doses, hallucinations. And so not very long, within a couple of hundred years, so not very long in historical time, within a couple of hundred years, cannabis began to be used in Mexico in ways that were similar to the ways that peyote was used or some of these other psychotomimetic drugs. And so by the late 18th century, we begin to have the first references to cannabis being used in this way, and the first references in the historical record. It was probably going on for some time before that. And at that time, already in the late 18th century, it was being associated with causing madness in some of its users.
Mm-hmm.
So already in the 18th century, we have the development of this notion of reefer madness in the Americas, and that's happening in Mexico.
And the reason for that was, and who was writing this early, I'll use the word negative, reports about cannabis?
Well, there's a couple places. So the cannabis ends up, it gains a name in Mexico in the Nahuatl language, which is the language of the Mexica or the Aztecs of central Mexico. And it's called, by the late 18th century, the Pipiltzincintzlis, which means the most noble princes. It's a very hard word to say and also spell. but it means the most noble princes. And it was a word that was attributed, used both to describe cannabis, but also probably some other drug plants as well. It wasn't uncommon for a single word to be used to describe several substances that were thought to have similar properties. And so the first references we have to the use of the Pipitzin sleeves and the first efforts to stop the use of the Pipitzin sleeves appear in the files of the Inquisition in Mexico in the late 17th century. So in the 1690s are the first references that we have of the Pipitzin sleeves. Now, the Inquisition didn't recognize the Pipitzin sleeves as cannabis, but these are identified quite clearly and convincingly about 70 years later in the 1770s by a quite famous Enlightenment figure in Mexico, a guy by the name of Jose Alzate, who had gone to try to figure out what these Pipitzin sleeves were that he had heard about and that were so famous in the trials of the Inquisition, and also had been expressly prohibited by the Archbishop of Mexico. He wanted to figure, he was an Enlightenment guy, he was a rational thinker, he wanted to find out what this stuff was and whether or not it really had the remarkable effects that everybody said it had, so that is causing visions or sometimes madness. So he went, he gets a sample from some local medicinal dealers in Mexico, and he looks at it and he notices it looks like cannabis, just like the hemp that they grow in Europe. And so he went and he planted some of this in his garden, and indeed the plants grow, and he said, wow, it's cannabis just like we have in Europe. So this is the first time, so he's the first one who really writes about this and identifies it as cannabis. Now, it's important to point out he wasn't trying to demonize the cannabis itself. In fact, what he concluded, in fact, was that these symptoms that were being produced by cannabis were perfectly normal. They weren't the main thing he was worried about was that they were the work of devil, right? And so when he found out it was cannabis and he did a little reading about cannabis, he said, "Oh no, this is a perfectly normal response to this plant." And the devil isn't, in fact, involved in this. And so that's a good thing. And we should let the Indians know that the devil isn't actually involved in this, right? Mm-hmm. So these first references certainly tie cannabis to madness, but it wasn't an express effort to demonize cannabis. It was, in fact, the other way around. It was, in fact, trying to show that cannabis its effects were not produced by demons, quite literally.
And then after, what was that researcher's name again?
His name was Jose Alzate. Alzate. He's quite a famous figure in late 18th century Mexico.
And with his, I'll use the word approval, so to speak, what happened over the next century with the use of cannabis?
Well, so then cannabis kind of disappears from the historical record, mostly in Mexico. So there are still some references that come up of hemp, so that cannabis being grown for industrial fiber. Mm-hmm. Because the Spanish, again, in the late 18th century, tried very hard to get a hemp industry going in Spain, in New Spain, in Mexico. Interestingly, it mostly fails in central Mexico. There is some cannabis grown, but it mostly fails. Where it does actually succeed is in California, where you are, and in especially among the religious missions that were there in California, and they actually have quite a bit of success growing cannabis for hemp. But mostly this fails, and it mostly disappears from the historical record. There, in fact, isn't another reference to the intoxicating properties of cannabis in Mexico until the 1840s. And then in the 1840s and 50s, it begins to appear. And here, for the first time, it's being reported that it's being smoked. So in the late 18th century, it was said to be taken in kind of liquid infusion. Mm-hmm. In the 1840s and 50s, it's being smoked for the first time, or at least reported to be smoked for the first time. And for the first time, it's being called marijuana. So that's when the word for the first time appears in relation to cannabis. And there in the 1840s and 50s, we immediately have reports of the kind of symptoms that would be reported countless times in Mexico over the next decades, which was that marijuana supposedly caused madness, and it made its users extremely violent. It produced these kinds of sudden outbursts of violence, frenzied violence in its users, and led to all sorts of terrible effects. And so that begins to get reported in the middle of the 19th century, and that reputation really stays rock solid in Mexico over the next 60 or 70 years. Virtually no one challenges this reputation in Mexico, and it was quite taken for granted. And then ultimately, beginning in the 1890s, that reputation begins to spread from Mexico out to the United States through the media.
Through the media of the day. So the media of the day was newspapers. Is that it?
That's right. So newspapers. So in the late 19th century, you have something going on in Mexico, which is very similar to what's happening in the United States and what's happening all over the West at the time, which is there's a boom in kind of more popular press, more yellow press.
Mm-hmm.
And whereas in Mexico prior to the 1890s, most of the newspapers were dedicated to really sort of very high-level debates over politics, and there was very little crime reporting and that kind of thing in the papers. In the 1890s, you have this new wave of papers, and it really begins a little earlier than that. You start seeing signs of it in the late 1870s and 1880s, where you start getting more crime reporting. What in Mexico is called La Nota Roja, or the red notes. And these were reports on every sort of crime, drunkenness and fights and prostitution and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's in those pages of the paper where you start to get more and more reports of marijuana's supposedly terrible effects. And the typical story was that somebody would have smoked a few puffs of marijuana and then gone into this kind of homicidal frenzy and began, oftentimes running down the street with a knife in hand and looking just to kill anything in its way. And this could be people, or it could be horses on the street, or what have you. And so there's a really critical moment in the movement of these ideas in the United States, which is in 1895, a newspaper is founded in Mexico City called the Mexican Herald, which is an English-language newspaper that has the AP franchise, the Associated Press franchise for Mexico City.
Yes.
And so the Herald was publishing pretty much the same stories that were appearing in the Spanish-language press in Mexico City. But those stories, of course, are being written in English, and they are being picked up by the wire service in the United States. So beginning 1896 or so, you begin to see the emergence of these stories in the newspapers all over the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
So from the L.A. Times to the New York Times, but also to little tiny newspapers in Ohio and Iowa and Indiana and so forth. And so you begin to have this kind of sprinkling of these ideas throughout the U.S. that gradually begin to build up a foundation of notions of reefer madness in the U.S. over the first couple of decades of the 20th century.
Thank you. For those of you just tuning in to Here's to Your Health on the LA Talk Live radio network, we're speaking with Isaac Campos, who is an assistant professor of history at the University of Cincinnati, and speaking about his new book called Homegrown, which is a history of cannabis sativa or marijuana from Mexican culture. And also, Isaac, at this juncture, why do some people use the word marijuana and some people use the word cannabis, and some people feel that the use of the word marijuana is a derogatory term?
Well, the reason they think that is kind of based in myth, actually. So there's a belief in especially the popular literature on the history of cannabis that the word marijuana began to be used in the United States in an effort to associate cannabis with Mexico.
Yes.
So it was purposely used by drug warriors in the early 20th century in order to associate cannabis with Mexico and Mexicans. And by doing that, it would play on the racist fears of Americans of the early 20th century to help demonize cannabis.
Mm-hmm.
This has been argued in various sources on the history of cannabis in the United States.
Yes.
The problem with that theory is that the word marijuana began to spread to the United States in this informal way that I just described. It wasn't, there wasn't an effort to use the word by drug warriors. In fact, the word started spreading by itself. And in fact, over the first couple of decades of the word spreading to the United States in reference to cannabis, most people didn't actually realize that marijuana was cannabis. They just thought it was this new drug menace.
Uh-huh.
So if you read those newspaper stories from 1897 up through, say, 1910 or so, they very rarely say that marijuana is cannabis. They just say this horrible drug menace is coming out of Mexico and it's called marijuana.
Yes.
Right? And so some people insist on using the word cannabis because they think that will somehow reverse, it's more of a, I suppose, politically correct way to talk about the drug. It's also more accurate, of course. Cannabis is the scientific term for this drug and this plant.
Yes.
So there's nothing incorrect about using the word cannabis. But marijuana's been with us for, about a little over 100 years now here in the United States. That is the word. Marijuana has been with us, and I certainly don't see any harm with using it. I do think actually it's quite useful to using the word marijuana is quite useful to help us remember that actually Mexico has played a really significant role in the development of the history of this drug, not only in the United States but all the Americas, where the word marijuana has kind of conquered the lexica of the rest of the hemisphere as well.
All right, thank you for that history, because there is discussion. I've had discussion with friends about what term is correct to use, and there is, there is opinion on that. Now, what about for us in the United States in the 1930s? Many of my generation remember in the 1960s and 70s, people would point back to things that were said in Congress in the 1930s, and we were inclined to laugh at them. So was the 30s in the United States a pivotal moment for the anti-cannabis or marijuana, I'll use the word movement, for lack of a better word?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, absolutely. It absolutely was in the United States. So what ends up happening in the United States, as many of your listeners probably know, cannabis was prohibited in the United States on the federal level for the first time in 1937. Mm-hmm. And a major part of the movement to prohibit cannabis in that year was a kind of scare campaign that was carried out by the Federal Bureau of Narcotics in Washington and its head, a guy by the name of Harry Anslinger, who's now quite quite controversial figure in the history of drugs because he was such a unabashed drug warrior and often resorted to lying and demonization tactics to get his way. So there absolutely was a scare campaign that went on with cannabis in the 1930s, and you wind up with all this lore about marijuana causing violence and madness. But how I try to correct that in my book is to point out that those things weren't invented in the 30s. So the 30s was crucial as a period where these ideas were really being spread around in the U.S., but it wasn't the first time, as I just described. I mean, this goes back to the 1890s in the U.S., where we first start getting these ideas about marijuana out there. So what Anslinger does with these tactics in the 30s is he basically just builds on a lore that had existed already in the United States about cannabis, and so it's not wrong to say that this was a critical period. It absolutely was a critical period, but these notions of reefer madness were not created in the 30s. They were just built upon.
All right. Thank you for that. For those of you just tuning in, we're speaking with Isaac Campos, author of Homegrown. Isaac Campos teaches at the University of Cincinnati, teaches history. Let us then jump to today on the use of cannabis or marijuana. Where do we stand now as far as popular opinion? And also, I do remember, was it just 3 or 4 years ago, or maybe it was 5 years ago now, when for a very brief 2 or 3 or 4 days, the country of Mexico legalized small amounts of cannabis and other drugs? So where do we stand now?
Well, I think we're in a very exciting time, a very exciting moment. With the now legalization of cannabis in Colorado and in Washington, medical marijuana being legal in so many places, something that was, of course, pioneered in your state there in California. Mm-hmm. We're in a moment of, really unprecedented drug policy reform, which is a long time in coming. One of the interesting things about the history of the war on drugs is that scholars who have studied the war on drugs have been saying for years that the war on drugs is wrong-headed and that it's doomed to failure and that it's a huge waste of resources and it's frankly immoral. And one of the things that historians like myself and other scholars have been trying to figure out is try to explain the longevity of this policy that doesn't make any sense and that clearly is failing. So, these kinds of reforms, this isn't the first time we've had a moment of reform. In the 1970s, a lot of states in the United States also began decriminalizing marijuana, and then there was a great pushback in the late 1970s and early 80s with the arrival of the Reagan administration in Washington. the big difference now from the 70s is that there now is extremely well-funded, extremely well-organized, an extremely well-organized reform movement in the U.S., led by groups like the Drug Policy Association, what was it called? The Drug Policy Alliance, excuse me, and various other groups of that kind, who have put a lot of money and a lot of resources and gotten very serious about creating real reform. And so now we're beginning to see the fruit of those efforts. This really, there's a really fascinating history of all of this, beginning in California in the early 1990s. And I think historically we'll look back at this period and say that, see that this was just extraordinarily important in the undermining of these really, really pernicious policies. Now in Mexico we have had essentially drugs that are decriminalized, so our traditional illicit drugs have been decriminalized now for the last couple of years. So you can carry around small amounts of cocaine and marijuana, and you shouldn't be arrested in Mexico. And that's important, though it's not nearly as important as drug reform in the United States, because it's the drug policy in the U.S. and the black market that's created by the combination of demand and drug policy in the U.S. that creates the enormous black market and profits that have produced the kind of violence that we've seen in Mexico over the last, decade or so,
yes,
to the tune of 60 or 70,000 deaths in that period. So I think it's without any doubt, this is an extremely exciting moment, and hopefully, I think all of us who study this hope that it will continue, because drug reform is long overdue. Drug policy reform, that is long overdue.
And as a historian of the subject, and obviously someone who understands the subject better than probably almost everyone else, do you have a feeling that indeed the cannabis sativa will be seen as a drug like alcohol and will be handled by alcohol, tobacco, firearms? Do you think, could that happen over the next 5 or 10 years?
Well, I don't know about the handling of alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, because there are a lot of different models for how one might legalize or decriminalize cannabis. And whether it'll happen in 5 or 10 years, I don't know. I'm very confident that it will eventually happen. How long it'll take, it's not especially clear. There's a real Gordian knot holding together the war on drugs. All of the different interests that are connected to the war on drugs on the federal level, and international treaties, and the prison industrial complex, and all these things. So in order to untie all that, it's going to be kind of tricky, very tricky and complex, and I'm not sure how it will happen. But I do think that eventually we will have legalized marijuana in the United States, some sort of legalization. And I feel very confident that someday we will look back, either we will or our children or our grandchildren will look back and will be astounded by how long this wrong-headed policy went on. And I think people will compare it to something like segregation, where you'll just kind of look back and go, geez, how did people go along with that for so long? It made no sense. It was totally immoral. It was jailing hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people over the long run. And so I feel confident that reform will happen, but it could be a longer road than we hope. It's hard to tell.
Mr. Campos, let me then possibly put you on the spot. I have spoken with other men who are researchers who are authoritative in the field, and one of them actually told me that he felt because the law enforcement agencies are able to confiscate your property if you have cannabis growing, that indeed much of the funding, or some of the funding that police agencies in various parts of the United States receive, is from seizing property, going after cannabis sativa, and this person actually said he felt that was a very strong motivating force as to why the drug laws have not changed. Do you have a comment on that?
Sure. Well, I absolutely think that's part of the story. I mean, look, there are a lot of economic interests that are tied up with the war on drugs. So let me be clear. I don't think that's the whole story, right? I think there's a very deep cultural roots of all this. There's a culture war aspect of all this, particularly since the 1960s and the close association between cannabis and the 60s with a capital S and the counterculture and so forth, right?
Yes.
But there are significant economic interests involved who are going to be going to have some real economic problems if we radically reform the war on drugs. And some of those interests include police forces that get a lot of their, or a significant amount of funding from this kind of seizure of assets that happens in the war on drugs. So I think that's absolutely true. Other economic actors who stand to lose by major drug policy reform are gun manufacturers, as I mentioned before, the prison industrial complex. If we're not jailing hundreds of thousands of people a year for drug law violation, well, then we need fewer prisons, right? Yes. And a lot of people are going to lose money over that. So there are a lot of economic interests wrapped up in this, and that's one of the things that kind of keeps, helps to hold this thing together despite its total irrationality.
Mr. Campos, I very much appreciate your taking the time to speak with us today on LA Talk Live about your book, Homegrown. And I would like to ask you for a final thought. When people would like to reform these laws so that the cannabis sativa becomes no longer a contraband item, what do you suggest?
Well, first of all, I would allow people. First of all, the main risk factor. So the main people who shouldn't be smoking cannabis are young people. So the highest risk factors in a number of ways associated with the use of cannabis are related to people, under the age of 20 or so who are using cannabis.
Yes.
So I would hope that in a reformed regime that we would try to keep children, youth, kind of the way we do with alcohol, have laws, but also education to try to keep kids from using cannabis, number one. Second of all, if I were, the drug czar and I could do whatever I wanted, I wouldn't allow there to be any advertising for drugs, whether marijuana or alcohol or these pharmaceuticals that are on TV all the time. These are very manipulative, and I don't think they should be allowed. So if it were up to me, I wouldn't allow advertising of it either. But I would certainly allow adults to use cannabis recreationally. And I would allow, local jurisdictions to make up the rules on where you can use it and where you can't. If a county or a city wants people to not be using in the street and using their own homes, well, that's fine, and that kind of thing. But what we definitely should not be doing is throwing people in jail for using cannabis. I think that's just an extraordinary waste of resources, and it's absolutely wrong-headed. So I think there are a number of different directions one could go in this kind of reform. But the key thing is to stop jailing people for this, and then we'll be off to a good start.
Well, Mr. Campos, I very much appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today. And your book, Homegrown, is it available on Amazon and Books and Books? Where can we pick up a copy of your book?
Pretty much anywhere. Just do a Google search. It's available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and all those sites online, so you can find it there.
Thank you very much. We've been speaking with Isaac Campos, Assistant Professor of History at the University of Cincinnati. His new book, Homegrown. This is Here's to Your Health on the LA Talk Live Radio Network. I'm your host, Joshua Lane. We'll be right back after these important messages.
Oh, your skin looks great.
Thank you.
What's your secret?
Frankincense and myrrh oil by Ancient Essence.
Frankincense and myrrh oil by Ancient Essence?
Yes, it's a beauty secret used since the time of the Greeks and Romans. The spa in Malibu told me about frankincense and myrrh by Ancient Essence, and now my skin is lovely.
Well, your skin looks great.
Call Ancient Essence at 1-800-627-9813. Discover the secret of beautiful skin. Call 1-800-627-9813. Discover the secret. Frankincense and myrrh oil by Ancient Essence. Discover the secret of beautiful skin. Available at fine spas and beauty centers.
Hey everybody, it's your man Sabir Bey back on your airwaves, inviting you to join us every Tuesday, 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on the Sabir Bey Show, discussing history, law, and hip-hop. Every Tuesday, 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, the Sabir Bey Show, exclusively on LATalkLive.com. You also can catch us on iTunes Radio and R&B, Live 365, Radio Flag, and now Stitcher Radio. or watch us and listen directly at latalklive.com. Reality radio, handcrafted for your listening pleasure. This is LA Talk Live, and we are more than just talk.
Hey, what's up? It's your girls, Forbidden Gems, inviting you to join us every Tuesday night at 9 p.m. sharp for the hottest, livest talk show, Forbidden Tuesdays.
Join us as we expose the new generation of love and dating and help y'all run the game right. Ladies beware, fellas bring out your notepads.
So don't forget to tune in to
Forbidden Tuesdays exclusively on latalklive.com. You can also catch us on iTunes Radio R&B or watch us on Ustream TV. This is
LA Talk Live,
and we are more than just talk.
You ready?
Hi, this is Dr. Levi, your fitness doctor, making a personal house call, inviting you to join me Wednesday at 10 a.m. Pacific for my all-new show, The Dr. Levi Show. Join us as we discuss fitness, health, and well-being, including emotional and spiritual health. So don't forget to tune in to The Dr. Levi Show every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Pacific, exclusively on latalklive.com and the Talk Live Broadcast Network. You can also catch us on iTunes, Radio R&B, or watch us on Ustream.tv, or catch us on the Live 365 network, and now on Radio Flag and Stitcher Radio. Reality radio handcrafted for your listening pleasure. This is LA Talk Live, and we are more than just talk.
Joshua Lane, member of the board of directors of Dr. Ann Wigmore's Hippocrates Health Institute, Josh Lane was part of the Dr. Ann Wigmore team that brought wheatgrass, sprouts, and raw foods to a worldwide audience. And now the host of Here's to Your Health on LA Talk Live, Joshua Lane.
We're back. Thank you for tuning in to this edition of Here's to Your Health on the LA Talk Live Radio Network. I'm your host. My guest is Brady Poppinga. Brady Poppinga, a fourth-round draft choice in the 2005 NFL, played successfully for the Green Bay Packers, and now he's playing for the Dallas Cowboys. And it's a great pleasure to welcome Brady Poppinga to Here's to Your Health. Brady, hello.
Hello, Josh. I'm very proud of you.
Thank you
very
much.
You have improved the enunciation of my last name vastly over the year, and I have to give you credit on that one.
That's right. Thank you very much, Brady. Yes, yeah. And you are on my show. This is a wellness show because you are a professional athlete who really takes care of himself. And that would seem, in 2013, you think that, well, most professional athletes would understand that they need to eat carefully and exercise and avoid substances, which are a bad idea. And yet we find that many athletes, unfortunately, despite their amazing physical prowess, do not take care of themselves.
Well, a lot of times when you're in an industry like the NFL or professional athletics, a lot of the participants or the athletes that we find to be the elite ones rely heavily upon natural gifts, such as natural speed, natural ability to jump, natural strength. Some are just built naturally big and strong and fast.
That seems fair.
Yeah, and so I think a lot of these guys throughout their life in terms of playing sports have always just relied on their natural gifts, and their natural gifts have essentially got them where they want to be.
Yes.
And then there comes a point to where when you do play games such as the game of football, which is extremely physically demanding, and it does break your body down. Many people who have played the game describe a football game as if you were a normal person anyway, getting into 5 car wrecks. And I would have to attest.
Fair, actually.
I mean, I've never really been in a serious car wreck, knock on wood, but my wife has, and I would say that it's very close. And so the point is there comes a point to where you have to regenerate. And you have to be able to recover because the body is just not naturally made. I don't care how fast you are, how big you are, how high you can jump. Your body is not naturally made to go and run as fast as it possibly can into another body of the same size, speed, and strength with a 50-yard space in between the two of the athletes. And what's going to happen? Something's got to give.
Yes.
And in the current day and age of the NFL right now, the big hot topic is about head injuries.
Yes.
Because that's the one thing that's really causing a lot of people a lot of concerns, especially those within the NFL ranks, because a lot of former players are now finally seeing the residual effects of these head injuries.
Right.
And so, to your point there, Josh, the thing that I see within the culture of the NFL and the questions that I have is I understand that there is an inherent natural breaking down process of the brain because of the nature of the game of football, because you do bang heads with one another. Yes. And by virtue of doing that, the brain is going to take on some inflicted pain. It's going to have some trauma. Yes. Exactly. And so the question I bring up is then, how do we recover? How does the brain regenerate? Because as you know, Josh, the brain can regenerate. Yes. It can recover. Yes. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of it has to do with what we consume. Yes. What we put into our bodies. Because after a game, guys have just gone out on the field, laid it all on the line. They're hurting. And there are a lot of guys that take the edge off. Guess what they're going to go do? Do you think they're going to go and get a massage and consume some nice fruits and vegetables or some food anyway that is conducive to health and wellness and the regeneration of the body?
Well, some
What do you
might.
think, Josh?
No, that's a loaded question. You tell me, Brady.
No, ladies and gentlemen.
You're there.
These guys go to the nearest bar, to the nearest cantina, and they start to pound it. They start to pound the alcohol, the hard liquor. Some of the guys like to take a little edge off with some street drugs, and that's what it's about, is being able to take that edge off, that pain off. And I just wonder, does that just exacerbate the already existing trauma that was inflicted on the brain in the game, or not? And
I would say yes, it would.
Yeah.
I would say yes, it would. But my question for you is, in 2013, with all the training the professional football player has, they played in high school, they've been coached. They played in college, they've been coached. They are elite athletes. They're working with the best coaches. And their access to media, I mean, don't they understand that that's really a real bad idea?
You would think so. But like I said, I think so many guys tend to just fall back on that idea of, hey, I've got this far by just relying on my physical, tangible abilities.
Yes.
Who's to say I need to change? Unless there is something that comes up to where they do lose their competitive advantage, or they have these eye-opening experiences where this information, these studies are starting to come to the surface about former NFL players. Mm-hmm. Brains they're finding, I forget the name exactly, but brain damage. They're finding brain damage in these guys, and they're finding Alzheimer's and dementia signs of it at very early stages, when in the normal population it doesn't start to surface. And so maybe that would motivate them to open their hearts and their minds up a little bit more to health and wellness and to what they consume in their body. But I think the NFL's trying. Don't get me wrong, they're doing everything they possibly can, but they're still so behind the eight ball. The teams that I've been on, for example, I've been on three of them. I've been on the Green Bay Packers, the St. Louis Rams, and the Dallas Cowboys. Each of these teams within the last 2 to 3 years have hired on full-time certified nutritionists.
Oh, wow. That's great to hear.
But the thing is they focus more on, okay, how do you perform well on the field? And I think that's a good idea. You should, because obviously it's a competitive world, the NFL, and any edge you can get, whether that's through what the kind of food you eat or what kind of recovery you can have, you're on it. You're going to have a competitive advantage. But where they're lacking right now, and the next step that needs to be made is, what are the necessary foods that need to be consumed following a game that can help the body, the mind, the brain, all of the organs that have taken on some type of trauma to recover and regenerate? And then that's where the education comes in to say, hey, guys, you can have your liquor, you can have some fun, but there's a time and a place for that,
right?
And I think that's the next step within the NFL, and it's a billion-dollar business, guys. But I got to be honest, there's still a lot of little areas of weakness that they can improve on, and they would say it themselves. And this is one area with health and wellness. And for me, being a guy that highly values health and wellness, that's why I've played in this league for 8 years.
Right.
That's why I've had the success I've had. That's why I've been able to go through a couple ACL injuries and recover very quickly and be stronger and faster than ever, is because of what I consumed. And it was from the information that was shared to me by outside sources that I had to seek out, but also by inside sources in the NFL also.
And so you, of course, have an interest in athletics. You played in high school, you played in college, you're at professional level now. So you've always found this subject, athletics, fun, and the whole idea of not drinking, not drugging, not drinking sodas. That just... Did your mom and dad set that tone? Was that it? You got it from your parents?
Not really. I think, okay, I can't fully just throw them under the bus and say they were completely ignorant and they just wanted to feed me full of junk. Right. I can't say that, but they tried their best with the limited amount of knowledge that they had. I'll say that. Like, we would have wheat bread. My mom would attempt to hide all the goodies, like the little what do they call those, like Twinkies and those pies? I don't know. There was Hostess. It was the whole Hostess line of products that are now extinct from my understanding. I think Hostess has been sold off into the wasteland of fit businesses that have gone out of business, essentially. And that's because, obviously, I think of the health movement. But those things did exist, and she tried to hide them from us. But we were obviously very capable and very smart, and we figured out where my mom would place them. But not until probably my college years did it really start to hit me how important what you eat has an effect on how your body performs. Right. I'll tell you what, we have a pregame meal in the weekly schedule of a football player. And you have it in college, even in high school sometimes, the teams will organize pregame meals. And there's two of them. There's one that's the night before the game, because as you know, that's where you can really inject a lot of the necessary nutrients into your body about 8 to 10 hours before the game that you're going to rely on. And then there's one about 4 hours before the game to where, again, you're sort of fine-tuning your last set of nutrients that you're putting into your body to help you on the field of competition. But what I used to eat in college was unbelievable, Josh.
Tell me.
This is what they do. They'd cater this steakhouse for us. And they would have filet mignons wrapped in bacon. They would have soda pop or popper. I don't know what they call it out here on the West Coast.
Soda pop is great. I like that term. It's great. Yeah, it's fine.
Just filled to the brim with high fructose corn syrup.
Right.
Then they'd have these double fried, or actually there's double baked potato, something double cooked potato, where they would actually bake it and then fry it.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, these were scrumptious food. And I'll tell you what, it was a buffet style. And I was making up for some lost time.
Gotcha.
I'm going to tell you that.
I gotcha.
And I would have at least a couple, maybe 3 of those filet mignons wrapped in bacon. I'd have me at least one of those.
Of course, you were 18 years old.
No, at this time I was past 18 because I went on a 2-year LDS mission.
That's right.
To Uruguay.
That's right.
And so I was a little more advanced in age than the regular college football player. And then I would also have, I would say, easily a 6-pack of pop. This is before the night of a game now.
Right.
And then that's not it. They would have, after that meal, about 4 hours later, about 10 o'clock at night, they'd have what they call, between quotations, a midnight snack. And the midnight snack consists of burgers, fries, hot wings, fried chicken. Mm-hmm. And I would go grab me a nice double-decker hamburger, each patty about a pound, with obviously the bun, full dressing, the ketchup, the mustard, the mayo, the French fries. Again, I'd have some more pop. Mm-hmm. And then the next day, I would try this fast. So I would try to say, okay, I've already consumed all my calories. I'm just going to fast to see what happens, And I swear this would happen. My coach, after grading the films, would always say, Brady, man, you play like an animal in that first 3 quarters, but by golly, you get to the fourth quarter, you're running out of gas. Do we need to rest you more? What do we do? And I'm just like, I don't know. I feel like I work out pretty hard during the week. I can't figure it out.
Okay.
And so finally, when I was introduced to nutrition and how the ultimate makeup of what you consume has a real direct effect and influence on your performance, did I see the difference.
Right.
And now, guys, ladies and gentlemen, I can play from the first quarter to even in through overtime and feel really good because I've learned what the body needs, and I've learned that health and wellness is something that really has a positive effect, not only on your performance on the football field, ladies and gentlemen, but in life. Because you can ask my wife. When we first started dating, I had to take a nap every other hour. When she lives out here in Los Angeles and she lives over in the valley, she's like, yeah, we're going to head over the hill to Santa Monica, go to the beach. And she has a whole day planned out. And I was like, well, is there any way we can come back over the hill to your house and take a nap in the middle of this? And she's like, Brady, there's no way. And I'm like, I don't know if I can make it. And now obviously I take naps when necessary, but it's not an essential part of my day. And again, it's due to health and wellness.
And so, Brady, for those of you just tuning in to Here's to Your Health, we're speaking with Brady Poppinga, the 4th round draft choice in 2005 for the Green Bay Packers. So, Brady, you stopped drinking sodas. So your blood sugar doesn't drop now, so you can play all the time because you stopped drinking soda. Would you say that's the main thing? You just cut out all processed sugar?
I think processed sugar, yeah. I wouldn't say I cut out 100% because I do have some fun. And it's like some guys that like to go drink, I guess. I have a Friday night and a Saturday night where, you know what? I let my shaved hair down. And I don't have any hair, by the way, you listeners out there. And so I let my hair down between quotations and I have some fun. I'll have some stuff. But throughout the week, no, I don't touch that kind of stuff because it does. It really affects your blood sugar. It really affects my energy levels in a negative way.
Right.
And so I just figure, you know what? Because I'm the kind of guy that I like to work out, not in one shot, although I love to do that. I like to work out throughout the day. I like to do a little in the morning, the little in the afternoon, and the little at night. And if there's any time in between, a little in between. And so I always sort of want to be ready to do that. And also, I don't want to have that feeling like I did when I was dating my wife, to where all of a sudden I'm like, I don't know if I can continue on. I need to lay down or go curl up in fetal style in the corner and take a nap. I don't want to be like that.
Okay, now
so that's the motivation why I really changed that.
When you had that feeling as a very young guy, you must have thought, this can't be right. Whose book did you read? Who did you speak to who said to you, no, Brady, you should stop drinking soda pop? Did someone say that to you? Just said, Brady, stop drinking soda pop?
No, because I always heard that. And everybody always tried to sell me on the idea it's the carbonation that did you in.
Oh.
And then I went to Uruguay. And down in Uruguay, guess what they drink? And I'm talking the soccer teams, everybody, and they're in great shape. Most people in Uruguay, they drink carbonated water. And I drank it a lot, and I was like, there's no way the carbonation has any effect, except for maybe settling your stomach, and it gives some substance to the water. I like that, And so that didn't add up. And then eventually I did sit down with a nutritionist, because and this is a great time of the year, when most NFL guys, or I should say prospective, future NFL guys, they'll go to these training facilities all dotted throughout the country. And there's actually one big one south of here in Carson City, California, called Athletes Performance. And in all these facilities, they try to hook these prospective future players up with a nutritionist, so that the nutritionist can give you some principles to help you perform better again. It's all about performance at this point.
Right.
From what I understand, hopefully they evolve to performance/recovery regeneration, which I think there's a movement in that end. And I had that privilege of being able to sit down with the nutritionist, and she sparked my interest. Because they talked about foods, their effect on your blood sugar level, which ultimately affects your energy. Then they talk about the kind of foods that respond in a certain way and the timing that you should eat them. For example, more of the processed kind of grains you can eat right before or right after you work out, because your body's going to be in need of those immediately. Whereas if you're in a desk job, maybe go have some whole grains, because your body would like the slow releasing of the nutrients, And so that you learned, and so it became a strategy. It became a whole plan, a lifestyle. It just wasn't just some random thing that you just sort of went shooting from the hip, flying right off the seat of your pants. And as I started to follow and implement those principles, I really started to see huge changes, not only in my body composition, but just like I mentioned, I started seeing a stark contrast from that old me that would run out of gas in the third and fourth quarter, and the new me that I felt like I could run forever. I always had this feeling of myself, or this perception of myself, that I didn't have a lot of endurance. I was just explosive. I can't run very far. I can't run very long. But
that's how you saw yourself.
That's how I used to see myself. But then when I changed my whole diet, I was like, man, I can go forever.
Right.
I can do that. No, I can do this. And it's just, it came to those kind of conclusions that really affected me. And then from there, I went off on my own, and I really started picking brains of reputable guys that had a nutrition plan. And then I started reading books and chit-chatting with great.
Thank you very much.
Vitamin shop owners, ladies and gentlemen, like Josh. He has a vitamin
much.
shop off of Canaan up in the Gora Hills, by the way. He has some great products. I tend to sort of slide myself to the Solgar. I like the Solgar protein. I think that's very clean, and Josh turned me on to that. And so people like yourself, Josh, have had a huge impact on me and really have helped me. And also it's been fun, and it's been like a science experiment. And so over time, I've seen the benefits, and I continually want to increase my knowledge of that. And because I think as we move forward as society, the information is becoming a lot more accessible, and also the information is becoming more relative to truth, I guess you could say, because our research is getting better. And so it's a holistic approach, but the main people that have influenced me have been guys like yourself, Josh, that I've ran into throughout my last 10 years of my life.
And would you say that since you've been, your dad played college ball in the late 60s, early 70s, and you're
big steroid user, by the way, and he'll admit that. But back in the day, speaking of progressive knowledge, do you know back in the day steroids wasn't looked at as a negative?
No, they were legal at one time
substance.
too. Yeah, right.
It wasn't looked at as anything that was wrong with you, and so obviously today that has changed.
Well, it made the men 20% stronger within a month,
and it also made the men women and the women men. So,
well, that's true too, Brady. That's very true. That's very true. That's very true. Yeah,
and that's a truth that we all eventually came to find out as men started growing breasts and their members started not appearing as big as they used to be. Right. And I hope I'm not embarrassing you, Josh.
No, you're not embarrassing me at all. No, I completely agree with you.
But we learn that over time.
But we have steroids because when people take steroids, athletes take steroids, one thing it does for them is in about a month, these men are 20% stronger, maybe even slightly more than that. And these men find that very impressive. And, of course, they do gain size. I've always felt that the ones who get injured have more injury and take longer to recover. But I think one of the problems with being a professional athlete, let's say you're a football player and you're 21, 22 years old. Well, you're 21, 22. You can't possibly envision being 40 or 50. And so you think, I'm always going to be a god. And so you think, I don't need to worry about anything. And that is very interesting. And I understand the dilemma of the young man or woman in sport who thinks, I'm 22. Okay, and so I can do anything. And I guess maybe if they do get injured or something and suddenly find themselves not on a team, then maybe they shape up because they suddenly realize, oh my God, I'm sitting home by myself.
That's a very good point, because the double-edged sword about that mentality is what really makes the elite athlete elite, because they do overcome a lot. They do find ways to be that exception to the rule. But the problem is it's not an absolute rule.
Right.
You know, you have to still abide by the rules of the body that we have been given.
Right.
You can't just eat chips and cheese throughout the week and expect week in and week out to perform at a high level, especially in such a physical demanding game like football, where there's a lot of trauma that takes place, not only externally, but internally. And so you're right. I think that mentality does play a role in the unwillingness at first for a lot of these athletes to want to learn more about nutrition. But over time, like you understand, they age, they go through serious injury, and then they see guys that have been through that same thing, and they see how well they're performing. Then they're like, man, what are they doing? What are they eating? You know, and a lot of times those guys are the ones that have taken to these nutrition ideas and these nutrition principles and implemented in their lives, and they've seen very good results, and then they're obviously willing to share them with others.
You have a brother who's a coach.
Yes, sir.
For what team?
He's a coach for the university, or it's Brigham Young University out of Provo. It's an actual school I went to out of Provo, Utah. And so he's the outside backers coach there.
And do the coaches talk to athletes now about nutrition in a way they didn't do 10 years ago?
For sure. And that's the thing is when Kelly became the coach, or actually even before that, he was playing there, and he talked about the pregame meal that I had just described early.
It's quite a meal.
They did away with that, and they brought in cold-cut turkeys. They brought in very healthy, nutritious food that are very well, that absorb, I should say, very well into the body. And then their midnight stack was eliminated. That thing now, I think they do yogurts, cottage cheese, stuff that helps the slow-releasing proteins that just help you through the night. BYU is different, though, because BYU has a lot of, in my opinion, their coaches right now, progressive thinkers. Their head coach is named Bronco Mendenhall, okay? And his name is Bronco. It's not his nickname. That tells you that he's a progressive thinker. There's not many Broncos in this world.
Not too many. No,
but they really – and the thing that's interesting about their coach, at least my brother and the head coach, Bronco, is their both backgrounds are as exercise science majors and master degrees in those particular fields. So they're both very knowledgeable with how the body works, the nutrition aspect of it also, and they do a very good job, in my opinion, of implementing it at BYU. Now, I think in the overall college world, just like the NFL, there is progress being made, but there's still a lot of progress. And like I said, I think the one topic that needs to be breached and needs to really be emphasized is the regeneration one, because right now, obviously, that's where we're failing in athletics, especially with football, because there's way too many head injuries. There's way too many effects down the road for these guys that are causing very life-altering injuries.
And what do you think the sport will do?
Well, like I said before, they shut themselves down because it's a pretty entertaining sport, from what I understand.
It's a very entertaining sport, and obviously many Americans love football, and men love playing football, and people like watching football. Now, people play football, in the 20s and 30s without helmets.
Yeah.
That might seem almost laughable now, so it must have been very radical to go from no helmets to helmets. So are they going to give us better helmets now? What will they do?
I don't think there'll ever be a helmet, in my opinion, and maybe somebody will prove me wrong. I don't know if there'll ever be a helmet that'll 100% protect the brain, because the brain isn't, and you know better the body composition than myself, but the brain's suspended in our heads, correct?
Yes.
In our skull. So yeah, and that's the problem with the brain, is that sudden stop as you're hitting heads with somebody else and the brain moving that causes some internal damage. But so I don't know if there'll ever be a helmet that'll fully be able to avoid the impacts that cause trauma. But I do believe there can be a great improvement, and like I said, emphasis on educating all athletes from high school or maybe even junior high all the way up, saying, okay, guys, You're taking on a certain kind of risk by playing this game. You're going to take on some trauma.
Yes.
Now, this is the
Right.
way you can recover.
Right.
Take these kinds of fish oils, eat this kind of food right after the game because the brain can regenerate. We know that the brain can regenerate. And again, I think you stay with the same topics of staying clear of your alcohols and your drugs and all those, the smoking and all that kind of stuff, because obviously that exacerbates the trauma that is inflicted upon
It does.
the brain.
I think a lot of young men and women just they never heard that before. They don't think about it.
And also, from what I understand, I don't consume those types of substances, but from what I understand, a lot of those guys, it takes the pain away a little bit. It gives them a little buzz, and so they associate that with regeneration, feeling better. But in reality, it's the pain's being numbed, but the damage is still being done.
Right.
So it's an ignorance. There's a level
Yes,
of ignorance.
I think it's
there.
ignorance. Yeah, I think that's fair.
And so my point is, I think the NFL obviously is going to start to push that. I think it's going to be something more of a topic that is discussed and is taught to its players. Hopefully, like I said, at the junior high school level, that it can be now brought along so these guys can understand, like, look, I'm going to take on this inherent risk and this inherent kind of game, but there are ways to regenerate and to still be healthy. And we'll see if that holds.
And you mentioned fish oils in passing there, but fish oils turn out to be very important for brain regeneration.
And I had a great nutritionist / trainer in Green Bay, Wisconsin, named Mark Lavatt, who's one of the best in my opinion. He's probably one of the most progressive.
What was his name?
Mark Lavatt.
Okay.
He's one of the most progressive trainer / nutritionists in all of the NFL. And as a matter of fact, there was a time when a lot of people, I'm not going to name any names, looked at him almost like a witch, or I should say a warlock, because he was so researched and a lot of his thinking was against the old traditional ways.
Right.
And you know how that goes in society. Those guys tend to not be treated very well. Unfortunately, he got a prominent job, and now he's able to really educate us. And he was a guy that left an impression on me, and he did. He turned me on or pointed me in the direction of these great fish oils that he said would really help in the regeneration of the brain and such. And so my wife, she's wanting me to get a brain scan to sort of see where I'm at after taking on over, I don't know how many plays, thousands of plays, 8 years of NFL games, to see where my brain is at, see if I've retained its full capabilities, which I can tell you right now, I'm feeling pretty good.
Okay, that's good.
But she wants some actual scientific proof of this. But we'll see.
But actually, a brain scan wouldn't show soft tissue damage anyway, would it?
Well, there's not. I don't know the technical terms, but a generic brain scan, let's say that you would do if you had a head injury and went to the emergency room, is not what I'm referring to. There's more complex ones now to where they can look into the soft tissue and see if you have. I think the CTE. Does that mean anything?
Yeah.
That's it. That's one of them.
CAT
I believe.
scans, yeah.
Yeah, but no.
Not a CAT scan.
This is actually one of the diseases on the brain. It's called CTE, I believe.
Okay,
I could be wrong with the
know.
acronym.
Don't know.
But the dementia, all those kind of signs of them surfacing, these scans can now look at them. And these scans are not run-of-the-mill scans. They're scans that are, I'd say, especially designed for guys like football players, boxers, or anybody who takes on a lot of impact.
Trauma to the head.
Yeah, with their head, that they can really go in there and sort of get a snapshot view of what their brain is going through at this moment to see where they're at and maybe see if there is something like fish oils and what you consume that is making a difference. See if they are regenerating. And I am still trying to push the NFL and these researchers to really try to get a sample of guys that do a lot of drugs or maybe not drugs, but drink a lot of alcohol at least, and see what their brain looks like versus somebody who doesn't. Because I would hypothesize, just being a guesser, that there would be a major difference in the two.
I actually completely agree with you. Well, actually, we've been chatting with Brady Poppinga, and the time is over. And Brady, how can we contact you? You're playing now for Dallas.
Yeah, I'm playing for the Dallas Cowboys, but my contract expires with them in February. But you can contact me on Twitter. I'm at Brady Poppinga. That's BradyPoppinga, obviously with the @ sign in front. I got to tell you guys an awkward story that happened to me last night.
Go ahead.
I walk into the Do It Center, and there's an attendant at the cashiers, and she had this, and I thought it was a he, had this dyed hair and everything, and I go, "What's up, bro? Hey, and I get closer, and it was a girl.
Uh-huh.
And the silence, the awkwardness was something that was, it was like you could touch it.
And what did you say then?
I said, "Oh, sorry." And she goes, "That's okay." And I said, "I feel the awkwardness." And she goes, "That's okay." And so make sure you know what when you're acknowledging somebody's presence, make sure you know their sex.
That's probably a very good idea.
Yeah. So you can find me at Brady Poppinga. We have a good time on the Twitter world.
Okay, thank you
And
very
if
much.
you have any questions or concerns for me, hey, I'll answer them. I'm a type of guy that likes to respond and interact with those that are on Twitter.
Okay. You've been listening to Brady Poppinga on Here's to Your Health on the LA Talk Live radio network. I'm your host, Josh Lane. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back after these important messages.
Hey, shout us out. What's the count? I'm your host, Ferran Dozier. I'm inviting you to join me on WDC Radio every Monday at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time as we discuss community topics around health, sports, and entertainment. So don't forget to shout us out. What's the count? On WDC Radio, only on LATalkLive.com. You can also catch us on iTunes Radio, R&B, or watch us on Ustream.tv. Reality radio, handcrafted for your listening pleasure. This is LA Talk Live, and we're more than just talk. What's the count?
West Coast Stand Up, it's your boy Omar Ray, a.k.a. Suge Gotti. Forbidden Tuesdays with the Gems, 9 p.m. LA Talk Live. Let's get it.
Hi, I'm Jerry Bell of the Daz Band in New Birth. And I'm Brahima Arsalan. Inviting you to join us every Wednesday at 2 p.m. Pacific Time for Jerry Bell's R&B Soul Classics, baby. Join us as we play some of the greatest hits of soul and R&B and listen in to interesting discussions with the legends of the music. So don't you forget, join us on the Jerry Bell's R&B Soul Classics. You'll love it. Exclusively on LATalkLive.com. You can also catch us on iTunes Radio, R&B, Live 365, Radio Flag, and now Stitcher Radio. Or watch us and listen directly at LATalkLive.com, baby. Reality radio handcrafted for your listening pleasure. This is LA Talk Live, and we are more than just talk, baby. We're music.
Are you ready to enjoy the Maui lifestyle? You can have it all by owning real estate on the paradise island of Maui. Dennis Rush, a 22-year Maui resident and real estate broker, brings his wealth of experience and market knowledge to add value to your Maui real estate understanding, providing a level of service as unique and exceptional as the island of Maui itself. The magical island of Maui was voted the most exclusive resort island in the world by Condé Nast Traveler, and keep in mind, Maui is only a simple, non-stop flight away. Hawaii Business Magazine Top 100 Realtors awarded Dennis Rush the 2011 fourth top realtor on the island of Maui. Go to www.dennisrush.com to view all of the amazing properties currently available in the Maui MLS system. Whatever your needs or desires, Dennis Rush will provide a private consultation for any Maui properties your heart desires. You will be in good hands. Once again, go to www.dennisrush.com. That's www.dennisrush.com. Contact Dennis today to start your Maui lifestyle now. Dennis Rush, proud sponsors of the Dawn Christie Show and LA Talk Live.
Joshua Lane, member of the board of directors of Dr. Ann Wigmore's Hippocrates Health Institute, Josh Lane was part of the Dr. Ann Wigmore team that brought wheatgrass, sprouts, and raw foods to a worldwide audience. And now the host of Here's to Your Health on LA Talk Live, Joshua Lane.
We're back. Thank you for tuning in to this edition of Here's to Your Health on the LA Talk Live radio network. And I'm happy to have Roger Parent back in today. Roger Parent was a guest on the show before. very authoritative educator in the field of wellness, and he's here today to chat with us about mushroom science products. Many of us recognize the value of medicinal mushrooms to heal the body. And Roger Parent, welcome to Here's to Your Health.
Thanks for having me back on the show, Josh.
No, it was a great pleasure. Your last appearance was, besides being educational, was fun. And obviously, mushrooms are known to some people, but others really just think they just taste good. And how long have medicinal mushrooms been used?
Well, I'm going to back up a little bit.
Sure.
Okay. Mushrooms, medicinal mushrooms, the focus of them is for immune support.
Yes.
So really, when you're talking about immune support, you have two categories. You have compounds that most people are familiar with, like pharmaceutical agents that'll kill parasites and microbes and fungus. Antibiotics, right?
Yes.
Or even echinacea, golden seal, things like this that people will come out, even garlic. You can
Yes.
walk into a health food store and get, or it's even in your food. But there's another category that's a little more nebulous that people are not as familiar with, and that's where mushrooms come in, because they're immunomodulators, okay? And they're immunologically active, which means that they stimulate your own body's response against these pathogens and germs and parasites. So they're different than the other category, which directly go against these things.
Yes.
Mushrooms don't do that. They stimulate your own body's response to go after these things. So that's, I think, a good starting point. Now, back to your question. People have eaten mushrooms for thousands of years,
Yes.
right? They've also used them in medicine, in folk medicine and traditional medicine for about as long.
Yes.
But they use them differently. They have to actually be prepared differently. If you're going to eat them or grind them up and put them in a pill or cook them and put them in a soup and eat them, you get the fats and proteins and vitamins, but you don't get the immunologically active compounds.
Oh.
So I gave you some slides. The first slide is about the cell wall of a mushroom.
Yes.
Okay. If you look at the cell wall of a mushroom, it's actually made out of chitin, which is what makes all shellfish and lobster shells hard. We can't digest that. That's the hardest fiber in nature. We don't have the ability to break that down. The problem is that the immunologically active compounds called beta-glucans, which are types of sugars, rare types of sugars, are actually bound to that chitin. So if you can't somehow eliminate the chitin or remove it, you don't get any benefit from these beta-glucans because they're not bioavailable.
Huh?
Now, this is something that is really skipped over, especially in retail. When you're looking at mushrooms, it's not really talked about. And it's really important. This is the most important thing. When you look at folk medicine, whether it's Russian, Native American, Asian, European, they always made teas with their mushrooms for medicine. Reason is because that dissolves the chitin. At about 170 to 180 degrees, the chitin dissolves, and those beta-glucans are disassembled enough to become highly bioavailable, but not so much that they're not active.
Yes.
So, and when you look at all of the studies, when we got interested in the West, basically due to Chinese medicine, in reishi and other mushrooms, it really was validated that that is the right way to use them. The unfortunate thing is that in retail, when somebody hears about reishi, for example, and they get online and they look it up, what they're actually reading about are the hot water extracts or the teas. But they don't realize that most of the time. They go to the health food store, they look for the cheapest reishi product on the shelf or whatever is available, and it's usually not a hot water extract. It's usually a mycelium that's grown on rice.
Yes.
And you're not going to get the same results. It's like if you eat a carrot versus a cooked carrot, a raw carrot, carrot juice, they're all going to give you different effects because they have different nutrients, different fractions of those nutrients, right? So, and I think that is probably the most important thing for a person to know when they're looking at mushrooms for immune support. They have to be the right form with enough of the actives to do something.
I think last time I think you mentioned that your mushroom science products are grown on wood, not rice, because you felt the rice didn't give you the proper, I'll use the word nutrient mix.
Right. So there's two main parts to a mushroom that are used medicinally. There's the mycelium, which is the part of the mushroom that whatever it's growing on, wood, rice, dirt, it secretes enzymes into the surrounding area, breaks that stuff down, and absorbs the nutrients back into itself. Okay?
Yes.
That's not what they do to us. But that form is usually what is sold on the marketplace, that mycelial form. They grow it on rice, then they grind that up and put it in a pill. It's 50 to 70% rice a lot of the time. And it's not an extract. So it's not bioavailable, and those actives that we're looking for in the cell wall have not become concentrated or bioavailable. That's really important. When you look at nature, where most of the medicinal mushrooms grow, they grow on rotting hardwood.
Right.
all around the world. So it makes sense that that's what you want to grow them on to get the right compounds that have been studied. Obviously, what has been used for thousands of years and given results is that type of material where they grow. This is called a fruit body. This is it's a teeny little fruit body of reishi. This is a real reishi.
Oh, really?
And it's very hard, okay?
Are we getting that on camera? Yeah.
So you cannot grind this up and eat it and get really any benefit. And the mycelium, so you see these dark compounds here?
Yes.
It grows on the log and it pulls triterpenes, which are these dark compounds, from the wood, and it also pulls high levels of lignans, and it incorporates that into its cell structure. These dark compounds are missing in the mycelium. And these dark compounds are anti-inflammatory triterpenes. They lower inflammatory cytokines like TNF-alpha and NF-kappa beta. If you don't have this in your product, it's not for reishi or chaga and some of the other mushrooms, they're not going to have half of the medicinal benefit. The anti-inflammatory part, the part that's good for liver.
I see.
The antioxidant portion, okay? Now, the mycelium and the fruit body, which we call a mushroom, have the beta-glucans, both, okay? But depending on the mushroom, like reishi and chaga, if you're not getting the fruit body, you're not getting the other really important compounds. Does that make sense? You're not getting the triterpenes.
It does, yes, it does, okay.
So we've talked about the way you have to process it to get the right compounds and what it should be grown on, and also the part of the mushroom that should be used. Sometimes you hear about triterpenes in spores of reishi, but they're really similar to what you find in the fruit body, and it's astronomically more expensive to get those.
I see.
So we're really talking about those two parts of the mushroom, and you can use both. Truthfully, you can use mycelium or fruit body, but if you grow it on rice, the mycelium on rice, you can't make an extract because it just turns gummy.
All right.
So you really want to do the fruit body and then pull that.
So that's the criticism you have of, say, other manufacturers of medicinal mushrooms, that they indeed don't follow this protocol that you use.
Well, again, if you go back to history, a couple thousand years of use of teas. When you look at studies, every single human clinical, hot water extracts. Okay. There are some preliminary studies where they use Petri dish and test tubes and hit it with a tincture of a mushroom, but they don't have any declared compounds that they're looking at. It's just this kind of whatever's in there. And they haven't really identified what it is that may be antiviral, etc. But we've known for decades that the beta-glucans are immunomodulatory, and that's what most of the studies are on. And that is really the part that's harder to get out of your food or out of nature. And really, you can't get it out of pharma, any kind of pharmaceuticals. So that is the important part.
All right. Well, thank you, Roger. We're speaking with Roger Parent, the educator for mushroom science. These are the products. And so let's say a person has a tendency towards getting colds. They get a lot of colds. Cold season now. Which one of the mushroom products could they use and maybe get less colds?
Well, in brief, all of them. And
that seems fair. Yeah.
So let's talk about what these beta-glucans do.
Yes.
All right, because another thing that I think is a little confusing for the average person when they look online or they go to a health food store, these beta-glucans that I've mentioned, and if you want to flash on the screen the triple helix, so in the cell wall you have a protein backbone, and then you have cross-linking carbohydrate side chains that come off of that, and they're surrounded by chitin. If you don't strip the chitin off, your immune system can't see that, so it's not going to have any immune benefit. Once you strip it off through the hot water extraction, now you have these carbohydrates and proteins that your immune system doesn't recognize as self. And it has fungal receptors on our white blood cells that will bind to these carbohydrates and start an immune cascade. Now, the interesting thing is if you think about how we evolved, really big soup of pathogens, right? I mean, we had yeasts and parasites and molds and fungus all around us when we were eating not very sanitary foods, you know, a long, long time ago. So we developed fungal receptor sites on our white blood cells, and different white blood cells have different fungal receptor sites that different mushrooms kind of mimic and will bind to. So you get a slightly different immune response from each mushroom, but overall, they all work in a broad way to increase your resistance to any kind of pathogenic onslaught. So cold and flu, probably the most common mushroom is reishi.
That's reishi.
Yeah, and one of the reasons is because it has those anti-inflammatory triterpenes. And reishi is really also good for things that you have overactive immune response in, like allergies, hay fever, maybe arthritis, autoimmune issues, because it has these triterpenes that kind of calm down those inflammatory cytokines. Another one that's really valuable cold and flu season is cordyceps. Cordyceps has a lot of cordyceps.
Yeah.
It has a long history of use in Chinese medicine for endurance and focus and mood and helping with libido. And it's an adaptogen, much like we talked about on the last show, ashwagandha, jiaogulan, ginseng.
Adaptogen means what again for my viewers?
It helps to balance your body's response to stress. It increases your resistance to stress. So anything that is overactive in your body, like stress, high cortisol causes blood sugar to go up and blood pressure to go up, and it suppresses your immune response, suppresses your digestion. So adaptogens bring those things back to norm. Well, another great thing besides being an adaptogen with cordyceps and having these immunologically active beta-glucans is it has some compounds that seem to be really good at interfering with viral replication. So it's good for flu inhibition.
Right.
So that's another one that's, I think, pretty diverse in its benefits. And chaga as well, because
chaga is very popular now.
It's really popular
and
now.
Why?
Well, I think in America, as new things come across the oceans and we get exposed to, they're popular for a while. But it's been used in Russian folk medicine for a long, long time, much like reishi in Asia. It has very similar triterpenes to reishi, which are the anti-inflammatory ones. It also has melanin, which is a very potent antioxidant. And chaga grows on birch trees. So, for example, Mushroom Science uses wild-crafted Siberian birch bark, chaga. And birch is rich in something called betulin and betulinic acid, which has some research showing that those compounds are directly anti-cancer. So you have a more diverse kind of constituent with chaga that can help in various, in a more diverse way with immune response.
And so there are some Russian studies that support that?
Oh yeah, Russia has a lot of studies on chaga. That's probably the main mushroom that they've looked at.
And are the athletes using chaga as well?
I don't know so much about the Russian athletes in chaga. I've focused more on the adaptogens. Now, overall, I wouldn't say mushrooms are adaptogenic because they don't really have the saponins that modulate hormones so much, but they have a narrower idea of it being an adaptogen, is that they kind of modulate your immune response. So for the immune system, they're very adaptogenic.
Wow. And so that's chaga. And chaga, I don't remember reading about chaga even 5 years ago, although I'm sure it's been around, only in the past couple of years. And we're speaking with, those of you just tuning in, we're speaking with Roger. Roger Parent is the educator for Mushroom Science. And I notice you have reishi, we talked about that. And what about shiitake mushrooms?
Sure.
Which people eat don't they eat those for dinner?
Right,
Yeah.
right. Now, again, when you cook a mushroom or you eat it raw,
yes,
you're not going to get that immune benefit. A lot of people say, well, I put it in my soups all the time. The problem is you can overdo it and make these immune modulating compounds inactive.
By too much boiling.
Too high of temp.
Too high
for
temp.
too long,
Right.
yeah. You don't need to go that high. It's like 170 degrees. And a lot of people will take mushrooms, will pick mushrooms.
Yes.
And they'll make their tea at home. But the problem with that is that you don't really know the levels of actives that you're getting. And you don't really know any contaminants that might be in there, and you have to use a lot. So the benefit of using a product this way, whether it's a shiitake or any of the others, is that we test for every known contaminant. Okay, thousands of compounds, thousands of compounds. So all of your petrochems, pesticides, various things like this, right? We also test for our levels of actives, and if you'll look at the back of these, every single one of them tell you our levels of percentages in percentage. And this is really important because when you look at studies, or if you're a doctor or a naturopath and you want to get the benefits that they get in studies, you can't really predict results and know how to dose if you don't know the levels you're using.
Right.
So if I just say 10 to 1 to you, I don't know if it's 1%, 5%, 10%, 20% beta-glucan. You have no way of knowing it. It can vary every time.
Right.
Well, we guarantee our levels, okay, which is really the only way that you can predict if it's going to work, because based on the studies.
Right.
Now shiitake is mainly going to have the immune benefit, but there are some studies that show that it has some benefit for cholesterol and a few other things.
Oh, heart health.
Yeah.
Let us say someone comes in to chat with you, a man your age, and says, man, he just hard to get through the business day. I really just am pooping out here. What would you recommend they do with your mushrooms?
Well, I think that the two Well, let's make it the three most applicable to our current situation. Is the cordyceps, because it modulates cortisol. It helps to lower cortisol and improve beneficial hormones like DHEA and testosterone, things like this. It also helps to improve cellular efficiency, and studies show you make more ATP over time with regular use, and it helps your cells to stay more aerobic. So you're not when your cells go anaerobic, then that sets the stage for things like cancer and other diseases. So I think that's really applicable. Plus, how many of us are around tons of people all the time? If you work in an industry where maybe you work at an airport or a big convention center, people coming in from all around the world. So it's nice to have your immune system online optimally all the time. And cordyceps can definitely do that. Now, reishi, I mentioned it's good for inflammation. Right. And we know at this point that most diseases have either primarily an an inflammatory initiation, or somehow related to an overactive inflammatory response in the body. So that helps to reduce that, which is going to help across the board to prevent other kinds of diseases from showing up. Wow. Also, it's really good for liver health. Things like reishi. Yeah.
How do you pronounce it?
Reishi. And that is the triterpenes that are the benefit to the liver.
All right. For those of you just tuning in, we're speaking with Roger Parent, the educator for mushroom science. And Roger, how can we contact Mushroom Science or you directly to get some more information?
Well, I would say get online at mushroomscience.com, and all the information you need is there.
Just mushroomscience.com. And of course, Whole Foods carries your product. Everybody carries your stuff.
Yeah, we're in a bunch of independent stores and Whole Foods as well.
Do you have any professional athletes using your product that you could mention on the air? Or?
No? That's not an area that I deal with. Probably if you were talking to someone in the office, they would know more about that. But sorry.
That's okay. I just had Brady Poppinga on here, as you met him, and so he's a professional athlete who's really takes very good care of himself. Well, you've been listening to Here's to Your Health, and my guest has been Roger Parent, the educator for Mushroom Science products, and they are sold everywhere. And we're going to take a very short break. You're listening to Here's to Your Health on the LA Talk Live Radio Network, and we'll be right back after these important messages.
Suffer from degenerative diseases such as high blood pressure, diabetes, fibroid tumors, high cholesterol, genital herpes, or a plethora of other diseases that rob you of a quality life? If so, then visit the website of herbalist Tahuti Ma'atra at dhealthstore.com and open the door to natural healing at an affordable price. dhealthstore.com has over 1,800 products created by herbalist Tahuti Ma'atra, specifically designed to help you heal the natural and safe way. At dhealthstore.com, you'll find everything from herbal formulas and cleanses, such as Tahuti's famous full body detox, as well as herbal teas, extracts, natural body butters, lotions, creams, children's products, hair care products, and of course, sexual enhancement products for both men and women. So visit the website of Tahuti Ma'atra, dhealthstore.com, or call toll free at 1-888-823-9416. dhealthstore.com.
Joshua Lane, member of the board of directors of Dr. Ann Wigmore's Hippocrates Health Institute, Josh Lane was part of the Dr. Ann Wigmore team that brought wheatgrass, sprouts, and raw foods to a worldwide audience. And now the host of Here's to Your Health on LA Talk Live, Joshua Lane.
We're back. Thank you for tuning in to this edition of Here's to Your Health on the LA Talk Live Radio Network. I'm your host, Joshua Lane, and we're speaking with the educator for mushroom science, Roger Parent. And Roger wanted to make several important points about the use of these mushroom products.
Well, I just wanted to make two main points. If you put that 3,000-year slide up, this is an HPLC of various cordyceps products.
HPLC meaning what?
It's a way of testing for actives.
Testing, okay.
It's a very, very sensitive test. So the top one that you see, very large discrepancy in graphing, that is a hot water extract of cordyceps, the way that we do it. And the bottom two are more common in the marketplace, a tincture and a ground up cordyceps grown on rice.
Yes.
So, and you barely see any bumps in that graph. Now, tincturing doesn't dissolve chitin, so that is one important thing.
Tincturing does not.
Does not dissolve chitin. You can pull many compounds out of cellulose with alcohol, but chitin is different. It actually tightens chitin up.
Ah, okay. That's important.
All right, and then the last point I wanted to make is you can really tell anything you need to know about your mushroom product by looking at the supplement facts. The supplement facts need to say extract, or it's not an extract, and all the studies are on the hot water extract, and it needs to tell you the levels in percentage. If it doesn't, you don't really know what you're getting. So I think those are two very important things for consumers.
Well, thank you, Roger. Those seem very important and very succinctly said. Roger Parent with Mushroom Science, the educator of mushroom science. Thank you for being a guest today on Here's to Your Health.
Thanks so much, Josh.
Thank you. And we're going to take a very short break, and we'll be right back after these important messages.
Hands can do incredible things. They made every sound in this piece of music. But nothing compares to using them to help save a life. If an adult suddenly collapses, call 911, then push hard and fast in the center of their chest until help arrives. It's called hands-only CPR, and it's recommended by the American Heart Association. Visit handsonlycpr.org today. A message from the American Heart Association and the Ad Council.
Hi, I'm Tosh Walker, and I want you to join me every Saturday evening from 5 to 8 p.m. for Cocktails with Tosh Walker, where each week is going to be a big party. Why? Come celebrate with me for the very first lifestyle entertainment sports show. And on my cocktail menu, I have special celebrity guests stopping through, and you never know who might come through, boo. It just might be one of your favorite sports celebrities. From Cocktails with Tosh Walker, the Entertainment Lifestyle Sports Show. Right here every Saturday night, where we're more than just talk. We're Cocktails with Tosh Walker. On LATalkLive.com.
Joshua Lane, member of the board of directors of Dr. Ann Wigmore's Hippocrates Health Institute, Josh Lane was part of the Dr. Ann Wigmore team that brought wheatgrass, sprouts, and raw foods to a worldwide audience. And now the host of Here's to Your Health on LA Talk Live, Joshua Lane.
We're back. Thank you for tuning in to this edition of Here's to Your Health on the LA Talk Live radio network. I'm your host, Joshua Lane, and our guest is P.M.H. Atwater, who is a very well-known researcher on a number of topics, most widely known for her studies of near-death experiences. And P.M.H. has been a guest on the show before, and the segment was very popular, and so we are inviting her back. P.M.H., are you there?
I sure am.
Good. Thank you. Thank you for being a guest today on Here's to Your Health. You are possibly best known for your work on near-death experiences. And for the viewers today on my show who do not understand the term, what does that mean exactly?
Well, let's focus on a good description of what a near-death experience is. A near-death experience is an intense awareness, sense, or experience of otherworldliness, whether pleasant or unpleasant, that happens to people who are at the edge of death. Mm-hmm. It is of such magnitude that most experiencers are deeply affected, many to the point of making significant lifelong changes because of it. So let's open up to the fact that near-death experiences can happen to anybody of any age, anywhere on this planet. When I say anybody of any age, they can happen to babies in the process of being born. That is to say, they can happen in the vagina as they're being born. Right. We've got pre-birth and babies, a person of any age.
And when you say near-death experiences, is this, in what way can medical science add to your studies? What kind of, are we talking about people in car accidents, or industrial accidents? They've reported this to their physicians. How has this been reported?
Well, it's been reported by all kinds of people in all kinds of different ways, of course. Earthquakes, heart attacks, pre-birth. There's a lot of birth trauma that produces near-death experiences. Coma. There's lots of different ways that a person can have a near-death experience. Drowning happens a lot with kids. With adults, women have it a lot with hysterectomies, miscarriages, somehow connected with birth. Men, interestingly enough, have it a lot with violent encounters of various kinds or accidents.
You mean such as like industrial accidents, like getting, knocked down by something?
Any kind of accident.
Any kind of accident.
Yeah, like a shooting, a beating, and an accident of some kind certainly could be some kind of chronic disease or problem. They can come from any kind of event that takes a person to that edge of death or, in fact, pushes them over. A lot of cases come from people who are clinically dead, many to the point of being dead for hours. That is to say, no pulse beat, no lung function, no brain function. And in fact, in the field, it is 15 minutes without vital signs is considered rather commonplace. So we run across this kind of thing often. And one of the ways, Josh, that you can really tell if you've got a genuine experience is, let's say the individual was out or no brain function for, let's say, 20 minutes. If they come back with little or no brain damage, some come back with a little brain damage, but most don't. Rather, they come back with brain enhancement. They come back smarter than they were before. And that's one of the ways you can tell you've got a genuine experience.
Now, you have been a guest on Here's to Your Health before, and so we have touched upon some of these ideas before, and you mentioned how you were once at a restaurant and a very big man came and started chatting with you and started telling you just volunteering this information about a near-death experience.
Yeah, that was in Macon, Georgia,
right,
at a truck stop.
Yes, you mentioned that, and that was a good story. And my question for you is, you have been a researcher in this field of near-death experience for 30 years, or is it longer than 30 years now?
Longer. I'm one of the originals in the field. Yeah.
And
I'm one of the originals.
You mentioned that also you were drawn to this study because of a trauma that occurred to you. And so now because you have done this research, are there categories? Is near-death experience the same experience for all your studies, or are there different near-death experiences?
Well, the basic pattern, Josh, is the same anywhere in the world. Doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter what age, whether you're a child or an adult. But how that can arrange itself can be very, very different. And the way people articulate it or language it can vary depending on language constraints or the particular belief system or their families or what have you. What I found in my own work was there was 4 basic patterns. The first one I called the initial near-death experience because it was very short, very brief. Something like the living nothingness or friendly voice, a quick out-of-body experience. And that's about all there was to it. The other one, an unpleasant or hellish experience. Yes, there are a number of them. They are not rare. People do have them. And these are often experiences very scary or very frightening. Sometimes they can be just caught up in a whirlwind. Sometimes it's lost in some kind of blank space where there are no other people, no sound. Sometimes it's something more of the Hollywood version, you know, like in a dungeon and you're being tortured. The other one is the pleasant or heavenly experience, and we all know about this one. Most of your books are about this, your documentaries, your movies are about this one, when less than 50% of the people have it. But we hear the most about that one. And then there's the transcendent experience. Very seldom is it ever personal. It has to do more with the human family or history, that larger idea of the human family, what we're here for, what we can do to help each other, solution finding, the universe. It's a very broad, large, bigger than life kind of experience.
What of the critics of this work, of near-death experience, what would the critics say? Would the critics say that some of these events are culture-bound, that they are indeed near-death experiences, but they're physical in origin, and that indeed they do not offer divine insight? What is the criticism?
Well, you know, the critics are saying a lot of things, you know, like it's a dying brain theory or, you know, oxygen deprivation or this kind of thing. But what's very interesting to me is that all of these critical objections, like oxygen deprivation, carbon dioxide in the blood, you know, hypocarbia, and so forth and so on, every one of them have been disproved in clinical studies.
Oh.
Not one of them have held up to medical clinical studies. And in fact, Josh, none of the critics have ever studied near-death experiencers in a large sampling, both children and adults, and none of them have explored the physiological and psychological after effects, the pattern of the after effects. Not one, not on this planet, at no time.
And so you feel that your work is indeed influential because possibly when you were studying this, starting in the 70s, that there was really very little action with this field, and now there's much more interest, is there not, in this field?
Right, yeah. Right, yeah. When I studied, very little. In fact, when I started my research, I'd never heard of Raymond Moody. I'm the only one we know of who went out and did her own research, not knowing anything about Raymond Moody, having never read the book, Life After Life, not knowing anything about the classical model. I didn't know anybody else was doing research. It was 3 years later, about 3 or 4 years later, Ken Ring, who was one of the major researchers in the field, found out about me, traced me down with a telephone, and found out I existed and came over. He stayed with my husband and myself, and we talked all night. And the next morning, he said, you're ahead of the rest of us. You've got to come up to Storrs, Connecticut, which is where he was. And he just said, you've got to meet your peer group, and you've got to get together with the rest of us and find out what we're doing, and we want to know more about what you're doing and what you've found. So I did, went up and joined the International Association of Near-Death Studies 2 months after it started. So I was there at the beginning and was able to compare my work to their work and found a lot of holes, a lot of things that bothered me with their particular protocol.
What did you, for those of you just tuning in now to Here's to Your Health on the LA Talk Live Network, we're speaking with P.M.H. Atwater, who is well known for her research on near-death experiences. What would you say that you brought to the studies that the earlier author, Moody, that did not have and which you felt they needed to add?
Field work. That is to say, I was right there with the people. I was right there with the families. I was right there with the neighbors, the healthcare givers, the bosses, and I was always comparing the individual story with the stories of the significant others.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, people are talking about, with wide eyes and big eyes. They're talking about their story, but my question was, okay, how do you drive a car? How are you able to balance your books, or how are you able to handle money now? What difference does this make in the way that you walk? Does it make any difference at all in the way you see things?
Mm-hmm.
Does it make any difference in your feeling structure? Does it make any difference in your health? Tell me more. So I was always comparing and cross-comparing with different people in different parts of the country at different times. I would cross-check all of my findings at least 5 times
Mm-hmm.
before I would feel like I had anything with any solidity that had any value. And by doing that, I was able to say that these experiences are hyper-real. They're not just real, they're hyper-real.
Mm-hmm.
And that they change that individual's life. They truly do, and in very significant ways. Many go on to have out-of-body experiences afterward. They become very psychic, very creative, very knowing. They often become healers. Many of them go into the ministry afterward. With the children, they come back so smart. It just enhances the brain as it develops, and many of them get into the sciences and medicine. So it's striking what happens to these people, and yet many of them come back absolutely lost, and others come back so profoundly changed that you look at that and you can say there's no drug on this earth that could do that to an individual. There's no way the dying brain or hypercarbia or any of this other kind of stuff could engender that kind of change. Let me give you an example.
Certainly.
From my research base. This is a fellow in Chicago, and he was a criminal. I don't know if he really worked for the mafia, but he claimed to, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And he was an individual who had killed, who had done a lot of really rough stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And he had a near-death experience. And in the life review part of his experience, he was made to undergo and feel everything that he ever did to anybody else. He had to feel that. He had to go through it. He had to feel the pain. Plus, he had to feel the pain and the confusion and the horror of anyone who was affected by that individual he hurt. In other words, their family, their friends, what happened to them because of what happened to his victim.
Mm-hmm.
So he got the full blast, not only of the significance of what he did to other people, but how that affected others who knew them or related to them or loved them. And when I met him, he was serving soup in a church kitchen. And, I said to him, what about this? He says, I can't kill anything. I can't even kill a bug.
Well,
he says, I just feel like somehow, some way, I got to make up for what I did.
Well, Miss Atwater,
And,
how did you come in contact with that individual? How did you know that individual's story?
Because he told it to me.
And where did you...
I met him in a restaurant.
Oh, I see.
This is really hard. to describe Josh. And I talk about this in my book, Near-Death Experiences, The Rest of the Story.
Mm-hmm.
And I talk about how I met these people. And most of them, it was as if synchronicity. Like that truck driver at the, at the truck, at the, this trucking place in Macon, Georgia.
Yes.
I was just sitting there at the table, minding my own business. He just comes up, asked if he could sit at my table, and started talking to me about his near-death experience.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same way with this fellow in Chicago. I would say well over 60% of the people that are in my research base were simply happenstance. They just appeared. I finally, came to the decision that somehow, some way, I must be wearing some kind of invisible sign on my back that says, talk to me about your near-death experience.
Mm-hmm.
The rest of them I went for. I met at talks or various kinds of classes that I held. I did put some ads in some newspapers and magazines, got some from there. I got some recommends from the medical people, especially nurses.
Mm-hmm.
So I got it from a lot of different sources, but mainly that you can call it, this very strange way of just meeting people.
Let me ask you a question about, once again, the term near-death experience. If you were working with an MD, how would the MD write up a near-death experience?
How would an MD?
Yeah, what would they say about it? Would they say lack of what would they say? They look at the heart scan monitors and they see a dropping of the numbers, or is it less blood pressure, or what is there a kind of a?
It's a real struggle for them, Josh.
Yes.
It's like Pim Van Lommel, that cardiologist who's done the best prospective clinical study. He did it in Holland, but it's the best in the world.
Mm-hmm.
For him, it was a big puzzle. It's like, what are these people talking about? I don't believe this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So he started doing this study and found out that, by golly, there's something very real happening here, and we as physicians have to look at this. And that's what the International Association of Near-Death Studies does. They make this information available to the medical community, especially the nurses. They try to get it out there. They give them protocols. How do you handle this? How do you work it up? In my book, Near-Death, it's called The Big Book of Near-Death Experiences. I have a chapter in there just for medical people, and especially your first responders. How do you handle someone who might be having a near-death experience? And I give them the exact protocol to use that has been tested in clinical studies of what they can do. So we have a lot of information out there, and we're getting more and more. I mean, that's our job with the International Association for Near-Death Studies. We're trying to get this information out to the medical community.
And let me just do a little station identification. For those of you just tuning in, we are chatting with P.M.H. Atwater, a near-death experience researcher, and you're listening to us today on the LA Talk Live radio network. This is the radio show Here's to Your Health. I'm your host, Joshua Lane. So, PM, what would you suggest?
Yeah.
What would you suggest for someone who's listening to this broadcast on near-death experience and has an interest in this subject? If they were to contact you, by the way, how can they contact you? I'm sorry, we should do that right now.
Well, certainly my website is www.pmh@water.com. All, lowercase one word, pmh@water.com. They can certainly get my book, Near-Death Experiences, The Rest of the Story. That's a summary of my work. But it's a page-turner. It's written for the average person, but it's really detailed about what really is happening to adults and children And it addresses the scientist, it addresses the doctor, the nurse, anybody, everybody, John Q. Public, anybody, school teachers,
And
anybody.
as a researcher, how quickly have you been able to contact some of these people who have had a near-death experience? Can you contact some of them actually within a day or two of the experience, or a week or two of the experience, or is it many years before you find?
For myself, it was about a week was the closest I got, because I'm not a physician.
Right.
I'm not there at the bedside, but I did catch a number of them just coming out of coma, or like a week, maybe 2 weeks outside of when it actually happened. Others, it was years later. It depends on the individual and where they were, and when I was able to contact them and found out just how real these experiences are, how authentically real, physically real. It's not a dream, it's not a vision, it's not a drug hallucination, it's not any of those things, and we're able to establish that through real clinical medical work. So, I'm not just out of hand here in making that statement. I'm making that statement based on fact.
Well, we're chatting with P.M.H. Atwater about near-death experiences. P.M.H. Atwater is very well known for her research in this field. Why has it been that much of the media has focused on the, I'll use the word transcendent media, experience of, seeing angels and things? Why is that? Just because it just I don't know why are they doing that?
Copies.
Sells copies, right?
It sells copy, Josh.
Right.
And the idea of the tunnel.
Yes.
Everybody has this idea that if you die and you go to the other side, you're going to go through a tunnel.
Mm-hmm.
That's not so. There aren't that many people who go through a tunnel, who see a tunnel. In many parts of the world, nobody knows what you're talking about if you're talking about a tunnel. We can trace back actually to that time in the late 70s when the media sensationalized Raymond Moody's first book, when he's talking about tunnels. We can trace back most of the reports to tunnels to that to when that happened. In other words, it's a media ploy, because there aren't that many people who experience tunnels. Now, there are a fair amount of people. Well, most people will experience that incredible light. Most people will have an out-of-body experience, very, very long and detailed. Most of these experiences have third-party testimony. And the idea of a greeter of some kind that's there to greet you, whether it's a loved one, whether it's a pet, whether it's an animal, whether it's a bird, whether it's an angel, greeter of some kind.
I do have a question.
And
can you give me a definition of the term out-of-body experience?
An individual who sees themselves from a position outside their physical body.
Oh, I see. Mm-hmm.
And they're looking back, and they're seeing their physical body on the table or on the floor, and they're realizing, whoops, wait a minute here, that's not me. I'm me, and I'm over here. I'm on the ceiling, or I'm on top of the building, or I'm riding on top of the emergency vehicle as it speeds down the road.
Right.
I'm not in that body. I'm here.
Wow. By the way,
and these are very detailed.
Did you actually experience that aspect of it yourself?
Yeah. 3 times in 3 months in 1977. I look back and I call it the heavenly sledgehammer effect.
Yeah, because
I had to have.
It sounds like it could be, upsetting also emotionally. But was it in general for you? Obviously, it was these near-death experiences turned out to be, in retrospect, very positive.
Well, the results were positive over time. What most people are forgetting when they're talking about near-death experiences or they're reading all the books, going to the movies, they're forgetting that these experiences come from violence or trauma.
Right.
So the person has a body to rebuild afterward.
Yes.
You know, they've got a lot of stuff to go through, and that's difficult. And then handling the pattern of after effects can be a real challenge. Sometimes that's easy to do. Most of the time, that's difficult to do. And takes at least 7 to 10 years for the average adult to integrate their after effects. So this isn't just some, flip of the coin here.
Yes.
It takes a while. But if you're willing to work with it, if you're willing to, find out how to live with it and have it enhance your life, then yes, the end point is extremely positive. I can certainly emphasize that.
Well, that seems like a good answer for my viewers. And we're speaking with P.M.H. Atwater, and well-known out-of-body researcher. P.M.H. Atwater, how can we contact you?
Again, through my website, www.pmhatwater.com. Please read the book, Near-Death Experiences, the rest of the story. That's going to help you a lot. If you're medical, get the big book of near-death experiences. Has a lot of medical stuff in there for you. If you're a minister or a religious individual, spiritual individual, you'll especially want that book as well.
And are you doing any public speaking engagements that you'd like to mention to us today on the radio?
Well, the only one that's in the state of California.
Okay.
And that's Northern California. I'm going to be at the San Francisco Expo on the 27th of April.
Well, that'll be fun. Well, my guest has been P.M.H. Atwater, a well-known researcher in the field of near-death experiences, and this is Miss Atwater's been on my show before, and it's been great fun. The listener response has been very good to it, and I would like to thank P.M.H. Atwater. And this is Josh Lane, and you're listening to us today on the LA Talk Live Radio Network. Thank you for tuning in.
For more information about the guests and sponsors of Here's to Your Health on LA Talk Live, please call us at 818-707-0005.
Reality radio, handcrafted for your listening pleasure. You're tuned in to LA Talk Live, where we're more than just talk.
Are you ready to enjoy the Maui lifestyle? You can